everybody? I know. Right? Where's the shades? Where's my background? I'm not Nem. That's why. It's Al Mega. And today I'm just going to introduce the amazing team that is the Cinema Crusaders team. Because today they got a fire movie that they want to discuss, a classic gem. I mean, so let me introduce the person who actually chose the film and will be leading the way with the team, the one, the only Mr. Jeff Bracey. What's popping, bud?
Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending where you are in the world out there, everybody. Tarzan of the Apes is a particular favorite IP of mine, written, of course, by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And the film we're going to look at, we're discussing today, is the only film that was ever got the approval, the blessing of the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate.
Oh, really?
So it's in a lot of ways, especially the early part of the first half of the movie, it's very close to the books, and then it kind of deviates off to get into other territory that would follow in the later books. But it's really great, and it's notable for the breakout performance of Christopher Lambert, who everybody would come to know as Connor MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod, the Highlander.
Yeah. And you know what? And let's bring in the rest of your clan right now of the Cinema crew over here. Let me introduce the one with Mr. Shade Wing, the Lord of the Beagles, as we were talking about.
Yeah, the beagle in question is in the background barking because that's what he likes to do. Anyway,
that's his thing.
Anyway, Christopher Lambert. There can be only one Tarzan, Lord of the Apes, and that's Lambert. So, but I was going to say, and I had read the novels. I really like the novels, and generally speaking, when I see TV adaptations or film adaptations, they never quite get what the character is. I see why the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate liked this particular film, even if it didn't quite get everything that it should have gotten. And the second half is kind of Downton Abbey with apes.
So now let's bring up the last one over here, the filmmaker extraordinaire, award-winning filmmaker, that is, the one, the only Mr. Lance Lucero.
Howdy. I'm excited to discuss this I think pretty good film adaptation of a long-standing, intellectual property, and I remember it theatrically. I saw it at the theater, 70 millimeter screen. It's rather poignant to me way back in '84. I mean, I remember showing up, looking forward to a darker turn of Tarzan. And unfortunately, the couple in front of us brought some little kid that they thought it was going to be me, Tarzan, you, Jane.
Oh, no.
And that little brat was screaming through the entire first half of the movie, which really bent us out of shape. But I was aboard. And then, funny enough, we left that theater scratching our heads a little bent out of shape at the movie-going experience just because of the audience. They didn't get it. They did not get it. The audience didn't get it. They were thinking it was supposed to be an action adventure through and through, and you can feel it. They didn't get it. Mm-hmm. So, we were kind of a little disturbed by it. So we drove up the street to another 70 millimeter screen, the Cooper, and saw Romancing the Stone, which was a different experience. We had like 2 epic movies in one day.
Wow, was that playing back then?
Yep.
Yeah. I didn't realize that was the same time frame. Wow.
Yep. And I always tie those movies together. I always remember the movie experience of Tarzan, this epic cinematic adventure, Greystoke that is, and just being in awe of it, but the experience not being great. And then going to see Romancing the Stone, which was like the audience came alive. They were like, wow, we were back in the jungles. It was adventure. But that's not selling Greystoke short. It was just, it made me realize, kind of how finicky and fickle audiences are way back as a kid.
Hey, Pops.
Hey. So that's something, that I think that kind of set the tone for the demise of this film.
Yeah. I will add that this was kind of the period where they were following the footsteps of Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's why you had films like Romancing the Stone.
Mhm.
And I really also wouldn't be surprised if that's why they were also leaning into Tarzan, which is well known for being a pulp action hero.
Right.
Yeah, but thankfully they, for those of us who appreciate the film, they did make this the thinking man's film as opposed to like, you know, the sort of action adventure that we would see later with, is it Alexander Skarsgård?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Alexander Skarsgård. What was that? Like
The Legend of
2016?
Yeah.
2016, yeah.
Not too long ago. Now, John
Yeah,
Cleese
yeah,
had an
2016.
interesting thing to say about the Monty Python Roadshow that they did several years back. And he said, you know, obviously Monty Python is a classic. You know, it's been around for forever because people just love it. And it's a thing about audiences getting it or not getting it. So, you know, they're used to having their audience. But as he traveled around the world and around, you know, our country as well, there came a show that they did where the audience didn't react to anything at all. And he said, I suddenly had the horrific realization that everything we did was not funny. And then they went to the next college town and the audience just ate it up. And they all realized, oh, actually, we are funny. It just all depends on who's taking it in.
Right.
Yeah,
And also,
British humor is very different than American humor, and if you show one to the other, sometimes it doesn't land.
Right. Which you know, I don't think that was the issue with this film. I just think that
No, I think you got it. Like they were expecting Indiana Jones, and what they got
Right.
was a deeply reverential adaptation of the book, and also, you know, very character-driven stuff. You know, there
And
wasn't
also-
like the,
and it's
the jungle
also-
fights and things.
Mhm.
It's also very much a fish out of water film, where
Mhm.
a lot of the stuff that you see would be very typical of a British period piece, you know, set in the Victorian era.
Mhm.
And then you stick in, you know, Tarzan, Lord of the Apes, who doesn't know how to fit in that world, and he's trying to learn like how modern society works. And you know, and a lot of the humor and a lot of the interesting drama that results from it is from that culture clash.
Yeah.
So you know, that's really where a lot of the draw is.
right. And the scope of the film, just in general, is magnificent. I mean, how they were on location, how they built the sets, how they were the cast, the crew. I mean, this
Amazing cast.
Yeah, like a $40 million film 40 years ago was unprecedented, and it should be. This is Tarzan. You know, this should be bigger than life.
And think about the fact, I didn't get to finish rereading the first book before this, but again, like the book, the first half of the book is all Tarzan of the Apes, and they had the balls to do that. Now, in the books, you get the apes have their own language. You know, you understand Tarzan talking to the apes. But in this movie, they had the balls to have no dialogue for 40 minutes of film. It's just Tarzan and the apes, and you're figuring everything out through visuals and context. So it's a brilliant piece of storytelling in that regard.
Exactly. And there's one thing that I do have to mention, that the version that I had watched for this review, it's different than the theatrical version that I saw, and it's different than the VHS version, because I swear to you, there's more narration from Ian Holm. And
it's been a long time since I've watched the theatrical, so I'm all of my recent context is from the version we watched for this.
Right, but it was throwing me because I'm like, well, wait a second, there's something missing here, and in particular, the end where he blatantly states.
Yes.
You remember that?
There was an epilogue. He had an epilogue at the end, hoping that Tarzan and Jane would find themselves together again somehow, some way.
Right, and that she could not go after him because she would not survive.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, we get into this era of, like when we were talking about Brazil. I mean, when we reviewed Brazil, that was the 5th iteration of Terry Gilliam's film. And Greystoke, from what I understand, it doesn't have a director's cut or anything that I know of, but now we get this version, which I know is different. It is different. And I think because
who's responsible for this cut.
I don't know. I was researching and I couldn't find it. It's like they talk about alternate endings, like she does run off in a deleted scene after him, and they decided to cut that, but there is no proof that footage exists. So we're in these weird times now where it's like, man, hold on to your physical media. It doesn't matter how old it is, because really, this kind of stuff is really starting to bug me. It's like, that's not what I paid to see in the old days. That's not what I watched. That's not what turned me on.
And just
and that's leaving out the changes that they make, just with re-releases and video streaming and whatnot.
Yeah, and to another point of this, I was watching a little docu about this film called St. Roddy Piper's last film, and the film unfortunately never got released. There was a lot of things that went on, and it's hard to see that film because back in the day, if a film didn't do well, a film wasn't archived and film gets lost, and even if you find some cases of film in a salt mine, which is a great place to preserve film. These things get shuffled around and lost if they're just not profitable right away. And it's a tragedy. There's a lot of lost film out there and a lot of lost cuts of the film that, us as fans would like to see. Right.
And as time progresses and the directors, they pass on and what have you, there's no seal of approval for these changes. And we're in a deadly era, just to stand on a soapbox for a second. We're in a deadly era of censorship and a remanufacturing, not just of ideas, but taking their source material and remanufacturing it
by people who had nothing to do with it, which is the worst thing. It's done by corporates behind closed doors, with no input from the audience.
I was just having this conversation with my wife before we started up. How I'm rereading all these books from the time period that when I was in high school, like Robert E. Howard, Edgar Rice Burroughs, H.P. Lovecraft. And, the ideas from that cultural period are extremely, incorrect, racist, anti-political, whatever you want to call it. But clearly we have, as a society, evolved beyond that point. But I am a strong advocate for preserving the works as they were. Because as somebody wants to go in and rewrite, this here, we're going to just change little things, make it less offensive, that sort of thing. But how far does that go? How long before the work is completely rewritten and then it is no longer the work and we have lost a piece of history forever when all those old copies go away and all we have left is something that doesn't represent the time and it does not represent Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Right. I mean, it's a conversation that I think always has to be put on the forefront when it comes to the arts, especially as we review older cinematic achievements. But having said that, looking at the film itself, I mean, it is everything it needs to be to tell the story. It didn't have that commercialistic aspect like Steve was saying. It wasn't Indiana Jones, and it wasn't going to be. Even though the sequences in the beginning are amazing, even that is not sustainable. You need to progress the story forward, which I believe they did. And that's where people started to grumble. Oh, well, we want to see him fighting. We don't want to see him struggling to be. No, this is acting. This is what it needs to be. So I stand behind this version first and foremost. And I'm ultimately turned off by any other version. I don't even give it a chance.
It reminds me very much of the film Dragon Slayer, which I went into the theater thinking I was going to see wizards blasting dragons with lightnings and dragons throwing fire all over everybody. And instead, what I got was a film I was much more grateful to see. A fantasy film that was a real heroic tale and a thinking man's film and just a beautiful piece of art. And by the way, we get the Lord Greystoke's father is also played by the fellow who played the wizard in that film, whose name escapes my mind at the moment.
Ralph Richardson.
Thank you, Ralph Richardson.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the grandfather. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant actor. And sometimes a film does not find its audience at the box office, but it finds it after the fact. And thank God for that.
It's a cult classic, and I think deservedly so.
Right.
The one thing I'm also going to add is I think part of the problem also is that over decades, the perception of the Tarzan character is exactly what Lance said it was, which is this Disneyfied version, where it's me, Tarzan, you, Jane. And when they don't see that, they act like, there's something completely wrong, when in fact, this is a truer version to the book than anything that had been made up to that point. I will say as an example, I even though it's not that great of a film, I have a liking for the Conan the Barbarian that Jason Momoa did in the mid 2000s because it was more Howard than what Arnold Schwarzenegger did. Now the 1884 film is great.
Yeah,
but I like the aspect that it is true to Howard.
Yeah,
even if
you
they might
definitely
have
get that.
executed it wrong in some ways.
And
Right.
like a lot of people
it's the
hate
same
on that
thing here
film.
with Greystoke.
A lot of people hate on that film, but I love it because I really think they did give us Robert E. Howard, the swashbuckling adventure, whereas John Milius did want to make, this bloodthirsty fantasy film, but he also wanted you to like really consider things that were going on.
Yeah. They're both great. It's just that they're very different. But you have to understand it's like being different sometimes doesn't necessarily mean that the original was true to the source. And sometimes later on you get something that is more true to the source and people tend to dismiss it because it's not the popular perception.
All right. I want to start with Lance here. I want to toss this question directly to you. Talk about the production. If you have any insight into the production of the film, because obviously they really threw everything at this with I guess I don't know if they had an expectation this was going to be a hit at the time, but they spared no expense.
They thought it was going to be a smash hit. They had a sequel written. They thought they were going to continue into the jungle. They thought this was going to. I mean, the director, Hugh Hudson, just came off of Chariots of Fire. He was the hottest item.
Okay.
So he got to call the shots. And then this was the eye opener. He had his big breakout film, Academy Award winning, what have you, Chariots of Fire. Then he went to Greystoke, which is a gigantic flop and also costed 10 times more than Chariots of Fire. This is a dream project, absolute dream project. I mean, with a director of photography like John Alcott, production value through the roof. And as a correlation, as a comparison, like we were just talking about the latest Tarzan, the 2016 one was Skarsgård. Interestingly enough, his dad was auditioned for Tarzan for '84. Didn't get the role. Like many others, Viggo Mortensen, Richard Gere. I mean, everybody wanted this Tarzan role, and then out of just nowhere, they give it to this Belgian. It's like, okay, this is his first English speaking movie. He's going to be Tarzan. So I often wonder, did that hinder the film? No, it didn't, because I think it was more honest and pure. And that's part of the production value. I buy Christopher Lambert. He's not this muscle man. He's not all shaved and perfect. I mean, he's wiry, he's scarred, he's mean looking. I mean, that's the way Tarzan should look.
Yeah.
I love the look of this film.
And he doesn't come across as Connor McLeod either. If you kind of look at it, you can definitely tell he is acting and he's engaged in the role that was written for him and getting in that script. He got the veneer of civilization, that is barely covering this beast basically. And when he goes and says at the end, that I'm half wild, that really comes across in the way that he performs that. And I think that was definitely something that the director saw in him, and that's why he got the role over all these really talented people.
Absolutely, and I remember that so poignantly in the original trailers in '84. I'm like, who is this dude, and why is he all filthy and in a English manner, and what's he? And that's hit, man. I'm going to see.
After generations of Hollywood Tarzans who are all clean and oiled as they're swinging through the jungles, we get a guy who's literally down in the mud with the apes.
Absolutely. And I think that helped. On location shooting, I think it's in Cameroon. Very difficult to shoot there. And they pulled it off amazing. But majority of the jungle sequences, of course, are in a sound stage with, of course, Rick Baker's groundbreaking effects. I mean, come on. I like how they made
I was going to talk about Rick Baker on the effects if you weren't, because this man has such a love for apes. If you see Amazing Apes, you need to check, because it's almost a certainty that Rick Baker has had something to do with it.
I will say the apes are so good that it made me want to see a crossover between Tarzan and Planet of the Apes done by Baker.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, that's part of the production value. You know, these actors studying for 9 months before going into production, learning to tumble, learning to swing, and then actually getting put in these state-of-the-art ape suits that were all different. Everybody had a character. You know, the father had the white beard, the mother had the loving look all the time. You had apes that looked like they had receding hairlines. I mean, you there was a distinction between the apes, and I liked how they leaned towards the book in the way of, okay, they're apes, but they're a different tribe of apes. They're a little bit more intelligent, maybe. They don't look the same, which kicks us into kind of a fantasy world. Yeah, and I think that hit it. They nailed it right on the head.
They try.
And they emote. The emotion is definitely there. If you see look at the scene where where his foster mother dies, I mean, it's emotionally powerful, and it's because in part of Lambert, but it's also because the emotion that shows on the face of the ape and the body language of the ape is so perfectly done.
Right. And you have to take Tarzan as a fantasy.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, Burroughs also wrote things like you know, Warlord of Mars. You know, he's very into his sci-fi fantasy, and there is no possible way that somebody raised by apes could teach himself how to write. As a matter of fact, children who have been found, you know, who've been raised by wild animals, there is a grace period where you have a chance of learning human language, and once you pass that, you know, you've grown. All these neurons are coming together as you're growing as a child. Once you pass a certain line of demarcation, you will never pick up human language. So Tarzan 1 has to be, you know, it's a fantasy world. He also has to be a genius on top of it to figure a lot of these things out by himself. And
I mean, my feeling has always been with Tarzan is that if he hadn't been raised in the wild, he would have become like Doc Savage or Batman or somebody like that. He's that kind of a genius. But you don't see that because he's raised in the wild and he's got those affectations.
You know, having like I'm almost all the way, like I've got like maybe a quarter of the book to go, but I'm totally into that vibe because they keep talking about him this bronze giant. You get this Doc Savage kind of vibe, and they keep talking about his heritage because there are all these outdated ideas about how, like, you know, your genetics played into your upbringing. You know, that like this somebody raised by animals, none of that comes through. That's a product of nature versus nurture. But here they had that fantasy idea that, like, you know, your genes rise to the occasion. You know, he's going to be the man among the apes and he's inherently noble and all this stuff that, of course, wouldn't be factual. And so it's a fantasy, and you get into it because that's the spirit of adventure. You just kind of roll with it. You know, Indiana Jones isn't going to survive all the crap he survived. You just got to, like, enjoy it for what it is.
Absolutely.
It's a pulp. It's a pulp. I mean, you've got to accept those tropes and understand that things are not going to work that way. And yeah, you're right. I mean, they've done studies in linguistics that, you know, show, you know, how humans process language. And, you know, they were shown that at a certain point, you're never going to develop the ability to properly function in society if you don't learn proper language early enough.
Interestingly,
so, you know, there's no way that would work.
One of my favorite studies there was an anthropologist who decided to, for a time, raise his toddler with a baby chimp. And it was all well and good. They were interacting. They were having fun. And then he noticed that his child was not starting to repeat human noises. He was starting to squeak and bark and chirp like the chimp. And he's like, separate him, because that kid's going to lose his ability to speak human language if he keeps mimicking the ape, you know, if that's where he's picking up all of his cues from. Now, let's talk about some of the actors. Brilliant cast, a bunch of amazing performances. Steve, start with you. Who would you like to discuss?
Ralph Richardson. I will say that this man was one of the greatest actors of his generation, along with people like Sir John Gielgud. And Richardson, we talked about how he was in Dragon Slayer, where he was, you know, amazing as the wizard. But here we see him as being kind of the contrast in many ways to Tarzan, or at least showing, you know, what the society might have been like for him if he had stayed. And I just love that. Yeah, it's like he immediately embraces John as his grandson. He doesn't even question it, because I will know when I look at him. And he looked at him and he saw his grandson underneath, you know, all that savagery. They had cleaned him up, but I mean, there was even so. I mean, this was still somebody who was very wild in his mannerisms, and even with that, he didn't care about that, and so you get that, and you kind of see he kind of becomes the mentor for John, and towards the end of his life, he kind of prepares him, for what will happen when he dies. And I just kind of like, and again, my feeling is a lot of this is very Downton Abbey. It's just that, you're dealing with somebody who's an ape.
I absolutely love the way you describe this film.
Right.
And
the contrast is so great, because you have somebody who represents what the Claytons are aspiring to be, as civilized people, and in contrast with somebody who's lived out in the wild and is completely separate from that. And they both learn from each other. And the way that Richardson really kind of portrays that is really great. And you can kind of see that towards the end, where he decides, like, yeah, I'm going to be like the kid that I was. And I'm going to, and darn it, I'm going to go and slide down my stairs, even though I'm 90 some years old. I'm just like, you're nuts, dude. You're not going to survive this. And he doesn't, but he goes out on his own terms. And I kind of feel like, yeah, that is a Clayton, and Richardson's acting just gets these nuances so well. You have these scenes where he's talking with him out in the field, saying, yeah, this is going to be yours, but you have to keep it. You never sell. And I love that scene, because it's like, it's not just about selling the land. It's about selling out who you are. Yeah. It's about don't compromise on being a Clayton.
I mean, wonderful father
those values
right there.
Yeah. And and Richardson just is that veteran presence, who is absolutely holding that together. And I will say, to his credit, Lambert holds his own with him. This guy that came in out of nowhere, and he holds his own with one of the greatest actors of the 1980s. And you just can't go wrong with that.
I'll say what I particularly like about his performance is, and it was funny because I'd forgotten, because it's been so long since I've watched the film, that this man is broken when you see him for the second time. He's lost his family, he's lost his future, he's lost his lineage. He is the last of the Greystokes. He's the last Clayton. And of course he's going to embrace Johnny, but we see him like dipping his shaving cream into his coffee, and his hair's all wild. And like, when all of a sudden he has this hope of a future for his lineage, for his line, and he sees so much of his son in his grandson's face that he often mistakes him for his son. And so even at the point where he gets so reinvigorated, he gets so pumped full of life once again. He's not a man sliding headlong into dementia. That I didn't get this at the time as a teenager, but on reflection later, I understood, like, him recapturing the joy of youth, and even that spirit of adventure that Clayton seemed to have, to slide down the tray, even though it's a terrible idea. So it's part dementia, part of that reinvigoration, part of that adventurous spirit. And I kind of ended up celebrating him, even in that moment that led to his death. And just such a bloody nuanced performance all throughout, man. Can't say any good things about it.
With the character arc and a supporting cast, which is usually, supporting cast is usually one note. You get the character, that's it. So we see a concerned Ralph Richardson in the beginning. He doesn't want his son to go. And then we see him in a maddened state the second time we see him, and then we see him rejuvenated. So there's a heck of a character arc, and it's written extremely well, and it couldn't have been any better cast.
Speaking of which, who wrote the film?
They give credit to Edgar Rice Burroughs. Robert Towne and Michael Austin did the adaptation.
Okay, you've got to give them all kinds of accolades for the job they did, because a lot of this isn't in the first book. It's not in the second book. Some of these wonderful character moments that play out, and they got it. They definitely got it, and they understood what Tarzan was all about when they were writing this.
Right.
Lance, who's a standout for you?
Oh, absolutely. Behind Christopher Lambert, I'm going Ian Holm. As Philippe. I mean, the dude, he's the driving force of the story when he enters. He is the guy that helps propel everything forward from then on. And he nails that French accent. I mean, even as Napoleon a couple years before in Time Bandits, which Ralph Richards.
Love that.
Just like Highlander, you just get these really weird, nationality switches where you get this Belgian who is playing an English lord, and you get this Englishman playing a French dude.
Well, what a great thing they did though, where they fix all of that in the movie by having him play a Frenchman who finds Tarzan and teaches him French. So it explains away the accent in the best way possible.
Right. I think that was something that had to have been done on the fly. You know what I mean? I think they probably thought, okay, this can work because of Philippe character. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he plays it hard and rough. I mean, he's stoic in the beginning. He's beat down, and then he bounces back. Once again, there's a character arc to the supporting cast member, which I found to be fantastic. And he's viable as that another father figure.
Yeah.
And he's devout.
You see that when Tarzan chases after the carriage as he's leaving, and he has to claim a keepsake of this man who has, for a moment in his life been his father.
Right. Mm-hmm. Razor, mirror, I mean, I always remember that.
I just love how they show Tarzan influencing the people around him for the better. Just in subtle ways by being himself. He brings the life with him because, he comes from the jungle and, he has this very freer or free-spirited way of doing things, and that's infectious. And people respond to that. And I think that you definitely see that with the character of Philippe. I mean, Ian Holm absolutely plays the transformation beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. What about you, Jeff?
Outside of Christopher Lambert, who, of course, did an amazing job, especially when you go through so much of the film without dialogue. And he does so much with his face and his posture. I'm always impressed with people who can act with their bodies as well as their face. So we expect actors to be able to act with their face, but when people can act with their bodies, I was so impressed with that. And I loved his little ooks and things that he would do, whenever he was upset, like, putting somebody's hand on their head. So whoever managed all that really studied ape body mechanics and body language and stuff like that. I was almost like, is Diane Fossey, or not Diane Fossey, what's her name? Gorillas and Mist Lady. Was she a consultant on this?
Right.
Yeah, so they had some really good consultants working on that. But I'm going to go with actually a character who's played by two different people, Addie McDowell, who has a very rich Southern accent, and she could not get around that. And having to match her up with again, this is another actress whose name escapes me in the moment.
Glenn Close.
Oh, was that Glenn Close? Holy cow!
She redubbed her.
I totally thought
that explains a lot.
Her accent is so good. I thought because they're shooting over there in England. I thought for sure they had an English actress doing so. Well done, Miss Close.
It was Glenn Close.
Yep.
So
really done.
She's an outstanding actress. Always has been.
Yeah, but the two of them together, only because I was aware of it upon rewatching it. Was I aware, like, there's two people on this performance, but when you watch it, it's pretty darn seamless. There was only like maybe one instance where I could tell like maybe the same person isn't talking, and I definitely didn't catch that at all back in 1984 when I watched the film. I just thought like, hey, this lady really has an excellent English accent for an American actress. But
I was just thinking, wow, and Andie MacDowell is a better actress than I remembered. And now I'm like, yeah, that's why, because it's Glenn Close.
Because she's got that Southern accent. That's always been a part of her film career. But just seeing what she's doing, again, it's the emoting, it's the body language, and she carries things across beautifully, especially for the period and the ideas people had in their period. And it's kind of funny, like. Reading the Tarzan books here again, it's very romance novel when Jane comes about, and there's all these romantic ideas like, oh, he was so beautiful and noble. There's absolutely no way this strange savage man would harm me. He's like, you really need to get out more. You don't know anything about the world, young lady.
Mm-hmm.
But
or man.
When you see her doing this, and she takes on this almost motherly aspect on into later a lover aspect because she's enjoying the process of teaching, and like this, he's almost like a long lost brother in a way, because she is a ward of the Greystoke household, but you can clearly see the romance blossom, and what's going to happen when she tells her beau, it's like, I simply don't love you, and there's no malice in that. She's just being matter of factual about it, and even though he's on her, it was like, oh, is it the savage? And no, at the time it's not, but you get to watch the progression of this, and the moment when he comes to her bedroom, and this would be so scandalous in the time, and yet her feelings have come that far along that this is the moment for them, and it plays out beautifully. I love that scene.
Yep. I mean, it's an actor's, a performer's dream. You're not going to see this because even just looking at the trailer of the 2016 version and the CGI and the cartoonish ridiculousness of it, and how it's more modernized, even though it's supposed to be 1885.
Yeah.
And then you look at Greystoke, which is made in '84 with the practicality of, look, we're not going to get rescued with any green screen here. We got to build the jungle in the studio and play this out. And I think that's where you really benefit your performers. You put them in the scenario, and they're going to give you that performance, aside from acting in front of a green screen. And it's a sign of the times, where I think these performances in Greystoke, in a Tarzan movie, they're not matched by any other film. They're just not.
I'll tell you, speaking of Ian Holm, like when he pushes the arrow through his body, like that made my skin crawl. I was feeling that.
Mm-hmm. I thought he was dead.
I tell you, he's pulling it. He's like,
that's acting, man, and making him eat worms, and his confrontation with those jerks, and when they finally meet civilization, it's like this is the edge of civilization. He tells them,
having to make excuses for his own,
And I will say, this was not Ian Holm's first rodeo at doing this. I mean, he had done Aliens a few years before, and he had done stuff like this. So, by then he was totally, in that moment, and he was able to take it to the next level.
Right.
Such a fine cast.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how you have a Ralph Richardson, who was like the generation before Ian Holm, and Ian Holm is as of kind of now coming up on the old guard. I mean, he goes back to the 60s, and he's in a lot of 70s flicks, and then you get up to how he's there with a Christopher Lambert, who is now kind of legendary in the 80s. You see like three generations of performers that transcended, and that's rare. You don't see that often, even in Andy McDowell. It's pretty fun to see. It's pretty fun to experience. These cinematic experiences can be recreated. I just think that nowadays there's just a laziness not to.
And I'll tell you, as a teenager going to see this back in 1984, I did want to see Tarzan scrapping with lions, and and the jungle cannibals and the tigers, and beating up on gorillas and chimpanzees, because I had read those books, and that was a big part of it. But at the same time, the book was so good that 14-year-old me was totally into it, and that's the mark of a really outstanding production. And when I think about that in context of the 2016, which gave us more of that, I felt like it was lacking, because and I love Alexander Skarsgård. I think he's a great actor. Obviously, Samuel L. Jackson's a great actor. But like when they all start swinging through the trees, him and his native friends, like the natives don't swing through the trees. Tarzan's the only one who swings through the trees. Like you said, the CGI gets a little funky. And it's just like, I so wanted that film to be good, and it just makes me appreciate this film all the more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would love to see a proper pulp Tarzan. I think they tried in 2016. The execution just wasn't there like you showed. But at the same time, I can respect what this movie does. I mean, it's not trying to be that exactly, but it gets the first half right, and then it does this other thing. And then this other thing that it does is perfectly true to who Tarzan is It's a well-told story with a lot of great characters and great performances, and it makes the point that it needed to make and it wanted to make. And I think that vision comes across very, very well. And even if it's not the book Tarzan the way I wanted to see it, it's still perfectly good for what they're doing.
I think maybe if we had gotten to a second film, we might have gotten some more of that, because Tarzan is very much the Jungle Book. The Jungle Book is very much Tarzan, and
Absolutely.
you've kind of got to grow into that. You've got to grow into the showdown with Shere Khan. We've got to grow into Tarzan, figuring himself out in the jungle after, like, I can't deal with society right now. And they did stick.
I want to see Law of Opar. That's what I want to see. The city of Opar.
Yeah, that'd be cool. But I did like it was subtly, and I don't know if they meant to do it like this, because in the books they keep going on about the nobility of the Claytons and how they're these manly men and womanly women. They're aristocrats amongst aristocrats, nobles amongst nobles, and you do get that here because of Ralph Richardson and because of Tarzan's character. And here amongst the elite of society, and they're talking about, like, it's a Greystoke, it has all this power and stuff, and like, we're so much better than everybody and everything around us. But the real nobles are Tarzan and his grandfather, and you suspect his father was as well. We just didn't get to see much of him because that's his role in the story.
Right.
And so they elevate.
Even in the limited time we see it, it is very evident. I mean, the guy was a doctor, for example.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that doctor, that's the actor that played Galahad in Excalibur. He discovers the Grail. I didn't realize this until we watched that. He's a good actor. He looks great. You know what I mean? So that struck me too, as this is the time frame we were in. We were in that era where we were so blessed to have all those movies come out and then have these same performers transcend. So this was one of those movies where you have that transcendence of performers, and it's just a bummer it didn't stick. But because it was so radical, once again, I can see why it didn't stick. I mean, you guys mentioned the idea of being pulp, which it is. It's fantasy pure. You nailed it, Jeff, with the Jungle Book. I mean, come on, this is the second coming of Jungle Book.
Yep.
I actually think the Jungle Book nailed it better. He was a kid. You can see articulation coming out as a kid. Mowgli didn't grow into a man. Yeah. So I think, okay, Edgar Rice Burroughs, I can see, even going back to 1912 or whatever, you were influenced by these people, and you kind of figured out an idea to say, well, how can I do that, but maybe make it a little more commercial? I'm not sure. We'll never know. But this is the cinematic universe. This is the literary universe at times. Even going back,
probably did read a lot of Kipling, so I can buy that.
Yeah, and Jules Verne. I mean, you could see it even with At the Earth's Core and The Land That Time Forgot. You can see this in Burroughs. So Burroughs, even though I have the complete collection of paperbacks of the 60s versions of John Carter, it's a case study. I look at those books and go, all right, I kind of get where you're coming from, man. Maybe in the old days, if people weren't as literary, you panned it off better. But as time progresses, I think people catch on and go, wait a minute. But, whatever. That's
yeah, I mean, like Burroughs, obviously his writing is a product of his day, but he is not known to be the most technically proficient writer out there.
No.
But he really knows how to set a stage.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what gets us invested, I think, is the worlds that he creates.
His world building is a case study.
And Tarzan is just such a great character concept, and the way that he defined him. I mean, just really, really cool character.
Yeah.
Definitely. Now, Steve, was this your first viewing of this film?
I think I saw a little bit of it back way in the day, and I just forgot about it. But this is like my first full viewing that I remember.
I'm curious as to because usually you're the one who has fresh eyes on some of these films. What's the overall experience for you as somebody coming into this new, might relate to audience members that we hope will come and watch this film in this time?
I would say that, coming in, I wasn't sure what to expect. I mean, I remember little bits and pieces, Christopher Lambert doing the dinner scene. And that's what I think most people tend to remember with this movie. But, coming into that, I was just like, okay, because part of my problem is like most versions of Tarzan that you see on screen are just not very good.
Right.
So I wasn't sure what to expect coming in with that. But when I came in, I was just like, yeah, I mean, they got enough of the book version of Tarzan. They got enough of that. And the stuff that they threw in the second half, it's like, okay, this is new to me, but I like it because I just love the way that they're kind of playing the fish out of water. They're showing like, how he just does not fit in this modern society at all. And towards the end, they make a really different conclusion than a lot of Tarzan movies do, which is, I don't belong here. It's like, I'm half wild, even if I'm all Greystoke, but I fit in better out there in Africa in the jungles with the apes. And he decides to go back there, and leaving civilization behind. And I'm like, that's a kind of a gutsy move, because normally a lot of people would play the ending would be, oh, I'm a man and I am embracing my status as a human being, and I'm going to suppress the wildness of my nature. No, they took the opposite approach here. That is ballsy. That takes some serious guts, and that takes some artistic vision. I dig that. I respected that.
I remember how shocking that was to me as somebody who'd been a fan of Tarzan movies and the Tarzan books, that they didn't end with a happy ending, because like that was like the most un-Hollywood movie ending you could have had. Where like, I mean, you can see it coming, but at the same time, you're still kind of waiting for them to fix it. And they don't. They take the story to its natural conclusion, which was absolutely astounding. And it like you said, Lance, the original, the theatrical release, you do get that voiceover that gives you a better perspective on it. But I remember being like, I took weeks processing this film, everything I'd seen, because of the way they handled the story. And they didn't shy away from things. I love how, when Tarzan is, cutting the ribbon for the new wing of the zoo, and he accidentally discovers the vivisection room, and the boldness of like having his ape father figure get driven out of the tribe, and then like he finds him here in London, and the tragedy of that whole scene, and he wails out his despair of, he was my father. And you can, like the looks on all these cultured British faces, like, oh, like what? No, that's disgusting. What are you talking about? But for him, he has now lost everybody important in his life except for Jane Porter, and that's not enough to keep him here anymore.
And Darno,
which I mean, even his reaction during that scene is priceless, and it's just seconds. It's like he understands it. He's the only one there that understands it. So, I mean, top notch all around, and it's something that's worth revisiting. And sometimes we tackle the idea, what would modern audiences think? And my idea is they would make it 30-40 minutes into this film and be done with it. They'll be like, no.
Sadly, I'm inclined to agree. I don't think that there's not a wide audience for this film today.
It is a film that requires a certain amount of patience to get through it, particularly the first half, because a lot of people are going to say, "Get on with it," Monty Python style, and eventually, once it gets over to England, then you really got to start getting to the point, and things really start ramping up, and you really start getting invested in it. But it takes that payoff, but you understand why those scenes are there. And there's really are no wasted moments in this, even if it's like, I want to see these things happen. It's just, this is the story that Burroughs told. These are the important parts that needed to be there. You just kind of have to get through those to really get to the good stuff, and the movie rewards you for having sat through it.
Absolutely. And every scene, and every scene in his development, every scene is a developmental scene. So the story is always progressing forward.
Yeah.
It is not stagnant. Even when the Black Panther finally gets to one of his cohorts, he jumps in the water, and guess what? He knows how to swim. You know what I mean? And that's a clue later on.
Figuring it out of pure necessity, because by and large, apes do not swim.
Sink or swim, right?
Yeah.
And then when he becomes Lord of the Apes, what saves him? Water.
He uses that man reasoning to use the water to his advantage.
Right. So every aspect of this is written extremely well. And this is a case study. How do you progress a character forward, even without dialogue? Here it is. Watch half of this movie, you're going to get it.
And I'd forgotten just how long the ape segment of the film is. Fully half of the film.
Absolutely.
But I'm watching this, and I'm like, every scene's necessary. Every single scene is necessary, and that segment of the film alone is a love letter to all the people who have ever read the books. Because, like I said, this first book, fully half of the book, is just Tarzan growing up amongst the apes, and you just get it all his trials and his travails, like being the stupid backward adopted child who can't fend for itself for years and years, whereas like the little baby chimps can cling to their mothers almost immediately, and seeing how like there are certain apes in the tribe who didn't like him, and in fact tried to kill him because he's so different. As we've stated, the Tarzan's tribe of apes are called the Mangani, and the Mangani do not act. They're presented here as chimpanzees, which I thought was actually pretty brilliant. A lot of times we think of Tarzan the apes, we think of Tarzan the gorillas, and that's how they present it in the 2016 film.
Right.
But that's not entirely accurate. They do have gorillas in the Tarzan setting, and he recognizes gorillas as gorillas. But I think the closest thing would be like the apes of Tarzan would be like the very large and aggressive chimps that we've discovered, the bonobos or the billabongs. And because
and bonobos they have actually used for a lot of experiments in terms of like language and things like that. So they are very close to humans, which is why they use them.
Yeah, and they're bigger, they're meaner. A lot of people in this chimps are predatory. They do eat meat.
Right.
Gorillas do not eat meat, and so you get this. They are hunters. They are killers, and so when Tarzan's hacking up the leopard and feeding it, that all plays in. And I remember like the great comic artist Neil Adams, the paperbacks I was reading back in the day, he did a lot of cover art for them.
Right.
And he always displayed he got it. He always displayed those apes as chimpanzees and not gorillas, which is like the popular culture on it. And just the way these things play out is fantastic. And I gotta hand it to the actors playing the apes. I mean, talk about some great performances from people whose faces you are never going to see. You never hear them speak a word. And we know how actors love to be seen, they love to be heard, but those guys gave their all in these performances. And it's not just the wonderful masks and the animatronics they have that give us so much emotion out of this, but again, these folks, they were dedicated to their craft, and even though instinctually these are people in rubber suits with yak hair on it, they still sell it. It's also believable. The only thing they could have done better is that if they'd have had like maybe some of today's modern wire work to show the chimps being as agile in the trees and in the jungle as they could be. And that's really the only thing I was missing, but I didn't miss it that much because I didn't care, because it was just that good.
Right. I think overall this is a top notch production. I mean, it's mind blowing, and I would rather have it that way than CGI. CGI just doesn't work, especially with emotion, even on an animal's face. It just doesn't work right. Whereas I think you can capture it with animatronic or having the latex tight enough to emote underneath it. I mean, I think that it was sold, and it was sold extremely well. I wouldn't see it any other way. So once again, going back to cinematic Tarzan, I mean, this is my version. This is the version that is the go-to version.
Yeah, I don't know who did the choreography or the training for the people doing apes. Now I know like we've got Andy Serkis, of course, doing all sorts of things, but one person they pulled in for Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes was a former Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey circus performer named Terry Notary, and he still works with Serkis, like on the new Planet of the Apes and things like that. And he teaches people how to be apes in these films. And whoever did this did an incredible job as well. And I would have preferred to have seen something like that, where like the actors in these costumes learn how to quadruped around like apes, because apes don't usually run on 2 feet. So like, they would get on there and quadruped around, and I did see these people doing this here, just not to the effect that they've learned to do now. But it just shows again, if you've got committed people, the practical is just always going to win over the CGI, at least for my money.
Well, I think so too, and it's just one of those things that it's the era we live in. It's going to go back. It has to, because I think people are going to they're realizing that you can have 200 CGI artists, or you can have a 20-man crew of practical art workers, art designers, and achieve a phenomenal amount of things.
For everything I hate on about the Disney Star Wars, I will give it, like anything that's being done by Favreau or Filoni, they are sticking as much practical effects work and props and things in the scene as they can. And you can so see the difference when you go back and watch things like Lucas's prequels, where they're just on a green screen set all the time. And you just feel like they're like, I feel like I'm watching the characters and they're floating like an inch off the floor, like it's there's that uncanny valley going on, but like with objects instead of characters.
Right. The geography, it's something that somebody asked me this the other day. We were location scouting actually at a restaurant underneath a famous restaurant here in Colorado, because I'm looking for something that might resemble a 1940s gas chamber. And this is an old building. The owner's fantastic. I shot The Unmentionables there. And in the booth of a restaurant called Gitano's, which is very famous in North Denver. And one of my production producers was there, and I had to keep telling him, well, understand, I need space and I need depth of field. I have a camera, I have a depth of field of lens. I have to be able to place the camera, which means I need at least 3 to 4 feet depth of field to be able to photograph this correctly. So there was the idea of space. Versus shooting in front of a green screen, where basically you worry about how well lit is the green screen, so that you can have the separation between your performers,
right,
and putting in the effects. Oh, geez, I got to light a green screen, not my performers, but a green screen. So there's a little bit of disillusionment to it, and even in your mind, you got to understand the depth of field when you add the imagery of the green screen. How far is it going to be? How far is it supposed to be? What's the focal length? Should it be thrown out of focus like you're shooting with a 35 millimeter lens, a 25 millimeter lens? So there are these aspects that, yes, the human eye understands it. When people are watching these things, they know something's wrong. But this is what they're presented with. This is what they go with. The most destructive thing is modern movie makers are now thinking, well, this is the route to go. Well, no, it's not the route to go, because really, do you understand your lenses, your depth of field, where your actors correlate to your background? The focus isn't the background. The focus is your performer.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing this too much, man, in modern movie making, going to festivals and what have you. You have 2 people sitting in a room. They decide to have a 3:5 aspect ratio, like 70 millimeter, like Greystoke. 2 people sitting in a room. Why? And it's green screened. What's the purpose of this? 2 people in a room talking. It's supposed to be intimate. Bring them in. The focus is them, not the background.
It only really works when Bean decides to say what he's got to say. Yeah, it only really works when you've got like films I do enjoy just for their fun sake, like Godzilla versus Kong. Those only work visually for you because everything in the scene is CGI. So like you can, it's all in animation, so
right,
it works.
It's all animated.
Yeah, there's nothing to create that dissonance, so you're fine with it then.
Mm-hmm. But the human element, people see it. Mm-hmm. So imagine Greystoke CGI'd. It would not work at all. Talk about a bigger flop. People would have probably laughed out of the movie theater. They'd have been like, "Yeah, that was garbage," But this is what makes it work, because it's practical. So there's my bid. And that's why we do this, so people can watch the 2016 version. I haven't, I probably never will, but go ahead and then watch Greystoke. See, do the case study, understand the character. This is why we're doing this show. This is why we're here.
Yep, we talk about
Greystoke is better, and I have seen both.
Yeah, and we're here to talk about older movies we love and hope to give them a second life for a whole new viewing audience. Now, the last thing I want to get into, the last aspects here is something that's going to be near and dear to your heart, Lance. I want to talk about the visuals, the cinematography, if you have any knowledge on what they were using to achieve the shots, but also the music. I thought the music played an interesting part in the development of the story in a way I wasn't expecting. Steve, we'll start with you, who is gone. Okay.
No, I'm here.
Okay,
so,
you dipped out.
Question? Yeah, that's the wrong one.
Talk about things like the soundtrack, sound design, and visuals of the film.
Yeah, the sound design. I will say that I really kind of felt like you were in the jungle. With they got the jungle noises pretty much down. They got the flavor of it down. I feel like the music kind of felt tribal in a sense. At least that's kind of like the impression I got watching it. And then you come into the England scenes, and then once again you really get that Downton Abbey kind of flavor, and a lot of it is that very civilized music, very classical, those kinds of elements that are in the background and that you kind of expect to see from those kinds of productions. And so not only does it work in terms of the environments and whatnot, it also creates the contrast, because you definitely get a sense that that each particular place and each particular environment has its own unique sound, and that they are distinct from each other and in some ways opposite from each other. And that reinforces things thematically. And I feel like that really works.
Did you have more?
I was thinking about like the visual designs, but yeah, I have to agree that a lot of this being practical effects make the difference, especially with the apes. And I'm also going to kind of bring in like one point that I kind of had meant to say. The time that is spent with the apes and with the visual designs of the apes really kind of reinforces, the emotion of that you kind of feel watching these characters. This is why you need all that time in the first hour to establish them, because you need to establish why Tarzan cares about them. Why these people these apes mean something to him in a way that they don't. The people in England don't, because we see that, and a lot of that is the animatronics. A lot of that is the way the apes are acted by the actors, the physicality of it, and the props that they're using. To try to manipulation of the mouths and a lot of the body language and whatnot. All of that creates the emotional impact that we need in order to sell what Tarzan does at the end. And I would also add the same thing for the sound design. So all of this contributes, to the emotion of these scenes and the emotion of the story and the emotional transformation of John Clayton from who he starts as at the beginning and what he becomes at the end when he becomes Lord Greystoke and decides to abandon being Lord Greystoke. All of that comes together, and it's every little piece of the puzzle, from the acting, but also the visuals and the sound and all that puts that together.
I gotta say, I'm so on point with you, especially when they're out in the jungle. So oftentimes, like, people throw in like, just random jungle noise. Like, you'll hear the kookaburra, which is not native to Africa, but you'll hear that classic wah, noise. And like that animal doesn't live there, but they really got it right. And onto the discussion of the music. One of the things I did like was that the music itself did become a character, and the emphasis when Tarzan has his Tarzan moments in the civilized parts of the world, like when the rejected beau starts clubbing the retarded servant of the simpleton of the Greystoke estate, and the big dramatic drum pounding kind of orchestral music rising really adds so much to that scene. And like when he's in just total pain and anguish, driving his horses around in circles. That music added so much impact to that, and it was so striking a difference. It felt like something that should have been more in the jungle, one of the more savage scenes, but to have it there just really just sold the story that much more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, soundtrack was epic. It's something. And the version we saw, we had an overture.
Yes.
And I remember there was an overture walking into the movie theater in 84.
Yeah.
I remember.
I watched the Amazon version, and the overture was in there. At first, I was kind of wondering, what are they doing? Because it felt like something that from like you would see in 2001.
Yeah, it's like going to it's like when I went to see Henry V. You know, movies just don't do things like that before. They don't start getting you into the mood with like a visual and a piece of music like that before you even start, rolling the story or the credits. Like, wow.
Right, it's commercials. It's and I knew that was coming down the pipe in the 80s. I'm like, one day they're going to have commercials, and boom, it happened. And it was like, I would show trailers, show an overture, do something.
Yeah, I was fine with trailers, but when 15 ads for Coke and Pepsi and shoes and whatever else, like, I could care less about all that stuff. When I go to the movies, I'm already inundated with it everywhere else in my life.
Right.
So, Lance, talk to us about the cinematography, the camera work, if you have any knowledge on what they use for the shoot.
Hey, John Alcott, man. Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, one of my favorite movies ever photographed on the planet. I mean, you have The Shining, you have Beastmaster, you have, I mean, the dude.
That explains the Kubrick feel that I got from that. Thank you.
Okay, I mean
I didn't realize he did Beastmaster too. That's why I chuckle. It's like,
right. I mean,
so good.
This is a professional. It doesn't matter what the story is. You do your job. I
mean, let's face it. Beastmaster could have been, and maybe even should have been, a crap movie, but it looks amazing because of who's working on it.
It looks. You look at a movie like Greystoke, and there's not a soft shot in the entire movie.
Right.
You go see Oppenheimer, I see soft shots. And I'm like, this is a $120 million movie, and I'm seeing soft shots. There are certain things that just irk me, man, just pull me out of the experience. But when you look at a movie like Greystoke, it is top notch from beginning to end. It's lit. It's lit well. The depth is fantastic. The right choices for the lenses are there. You see the backgrounds. You see the environments that are real. I mean, first and foremost, the cinematography in this film is one of the best on the planet. John Alcott is one of the best on the planet, I'll call it, as far as cinematographers. Yeah, everybody's going to argue, what about Roger Deakins? Okay, yeah, all right. Let's just keep going down that route. But you got a John Alcott. You have a Laszlo Kovacs. You have a Ronnie Mueller, who are designed to make films with little. And the imagery is stellar. So this, once again, is a case study to watch a film that can go from a real live jungle to a sound stage to real live locations in Britain under completely different lighting circumstances and still look lush and colorful and cinematic. I mean, first and foremost, top notch.
I definitely have something to say to that because I was so stricken by the lighting, like obviously the jungle, you've got your atmospheric lighting and all that. And when they first reach civilization, it's just lit by a couple of like oil lamps here and there. The richness of the Greystoke estate and how the lighting in there just brings out all of that wood. And in particular, again, one of my favorite scenes, the scene where Tarzan and Jane consummate. But I couldn't help but think, watching this film, it just hit me all of a sudden. I was like, there's no color grading here, and I'm glad there's no color grading here. Like, it's been so long since I've seen a film without color grading. Sometimes I forget how beautiful films used to be without all of that muckety muck going on.
It's called, and I'd gotten a little bit of debate with another movie maker on this, where he was looking for a color theorist for his film. I said, well, whoa, film or video? Well, it's HD. Okay, so it's video. What do you mean a color theorist? There's no theory in color. You shoot the grayscale, you shoot a color card, you have your color there.
Yes. I am an artist. I have to know color theory. I draw stuff, I paint stuff. I have to know how colors work. When you've got a camera, the color's already there. Nature's already taking care of that for you.
Right. You are mixing your colors, correct? A film stock. This is the film stock I'm going to use. Okay, it leans warm. Great. We know this. This is how we're going to light it. We're going to warm it up. We're going to use the appropriate filters. We're going to do all of this that is necessary to bring out the imagery. Now, you look at modern movies and all of a sudden it could be a period piece and a guy's in a dark attic and the light is green. It's like, why is the light green? And why is the black going into pure muck? I'm like, what is the concept behind this and who would I fire because of this? It's like, no, man. You don't theorize that. Your colors are there. It's how do you bring them out? And this is once again where it gets lost with green screen. Because if you're lighting your subject and you don't know what the color is of your background, how are you going to correlate the two?
Yeah, the background colors make such a difference because when you are in a real setting, light bounces. Your rim lights, your highlights, the colors in your face, all of this is affected by your surrounding. You know, if I hold up one piece of colored paper next to my face will take on a different character. If I have another different color, it'll take on a different character, and all that matters. And you're not going to get that when you're not in a reality. I'll say one of my favorite pieces of technology.
I was going to say reality is your canvas, so you have to know how to use the tools that you have.
I mean, like here's one thing I'll say. Jon Favreau doing his innovations, the volume that they created to shoot things like he kind of got the idea working on his Jungle Book with using screens to cast accurate shadows from CGI animals onto the Mowgli, which was genius. And then the volume that they created to do their Star Wars stuff. At the very least, if you're working in a set that's only a partial set, you are still getting those colors that are landing on the actors, and you're seeing reality there. You're seeing accuracy, even if you're cheating it like that. And so I respect that.
It at that level, you have a little bit more wiggle room.
Yeah.
At an independent level, or even a few notches lower, a lot of times they think they have that wiggle room. Well, I can do what they're doing, and maybe you can, but if you're still doing what they're doing and it isn't exactly correct, you're doing yourself a disservice. You know, whereas you look at a Greystoke, they go to the locations, they light it. You know, I'd imagine John Alcott is testing his lenses. I know he has his probably his glass viewfinder. He's looking at the shadows and the contrasts. Where's the actor gonna be when it's set up? You shoot. Your actors have freedom. It's captured. You move on. You don't need to worry about special effects. You do a little bit of color grading. That's it. It's over with. And people are fighting me on the aspect of how impractical it is to shoot on film and do it in a live space. No, it isn't, because guess what? I'm going to get it done faster than you. Yeah. It's just, I'm not doing anything new. I'm doing what they've been doing 30 years.
Yeah, and we still have outsourcers out there doing it. You know, I watched The Hateful Eight, and Quentin Tarantino brought out some stock that hadn't been used in forever, and that film is gorgeous to look at.
Yeah. So, you know, to me, it's about the photography and capturing what Tarzan is, his environment. This nails it. John Alcott, he's one of my favorites, man. I'll watch Barry Lyndon. That's all I have to say. You know, it's one of the most beautifully photographed movies in cinematic history, and I'll stand by that.
All right. Do you guys have any final thoughts on the film before we go?
I would say this is I was going to say just to sum things up, this is a movie that is definitely worth revisiting. If you haven't seen it before, and you may not have. I mean, if you're just somebody that
1984,
if you tend to have the same problems with Tarzan that I have, and you've read the books, definitely watch this one. You're going to get a pretty faithful Tarzan experience, if not a perfect one, to the books. But where it changes, it actually tells a really great story. But it's also worth watching just to see the fish out of water culture clash stuff. That is all really good, and it's done by some of the best actors of the time.
Yeah.
And Christopher Lambert is absolutely not like the caricature that you're kind of expecting to seeing in his other films. Like a lot of his later films, he kind of looks like Connor McLeod. He is definitely not Connor McLeod. He is John Clayton, Lord of the Apes, and I think you definitely should. If you're going to see a Tarzan film, it should be this one.
Absolutely. Agreed. This is the one you see. And as you two mentioned, you have Pulp. At this point, Pulp was turned into a cinematic masterpiece. That's rare. That is very rare to do. And this is one instance where I think it actually stands alone. This does not look like a Pulp movie. It does not feel like a Pulp movie.
Yeah.
It is top notch. So it is worth.
And yet it is very true to Tarzan, which that's a hard thing to do as well.
Absolutely. So I'd say, yeah, this is if Burroughs' estate endorses it, why shouldn't we and why shouldn't people watch it?
Yeah, because I'm fairly certain this is because it was big news when it came out. They were endorsing this script, and so I don't think any film before or since, well, definitely not before, has gotten that recognition from his estate. So
Nope.
That's the stamp of approval I'm going to go by. Now,
Awesome.
as for next week, I'm not sure what we're doing. We fell a little bit behind our schedule because we've been picking movies that have actors in this whatever movie we're each doing for the next week. But next week is October. So
we're supposed to be starting the horror fest.
Should be moving into our horror fest. So I'm sure we'll post on Twitter what we're going to tackle next for you guys to watch. So get ready for the spooky stuff, guys.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us tonight for some more Cinema Crusaders, everybody.
Awesome.
And thank you, Lance.
Thanks everybody, and I want to give a shout out to our regular host Nem, who unfortunately couldn't be here.
Right.
Hopefully everything's going well with him, and we'll see him again soon.
We will see him soon. I mean, let's see what he comes up with.
Take us out, Al.
Take us out, Al.
Wepa, thank you, everybody. Cinema Crusaders out.